Hey, I think we're back. I'm not sure what happened. Perfect example of why broadband internet is so important. But we're back. I don't know where I got cut off, so I will just put a plug that I'm running to represent this community. I look forward to being in Augusta. Please vote on July 14th. And we're going to move on to our yeah. So thank you. Welcome, Karen and Megan. I've invited Karen Kleinkopf, the coordinator for farms at the Y, and Meg Taft, who has dual roles, part at Good Shepherd Food Bank and as a co-founder of Twin Villages Food Bank Farm right here in Damascata, right? The farm is in Damascata, how the hub's in Damascata, but representing Twin Villages.
Yeah, thank you.
Welcome. Yeah, if you both want to, Meg, if you want to start, if you would just share with the audience kind of some of your work and how you got involved in food security.
Yeah, sure thing. Thanks so much, Lydia. It's really fun to be here. I'm excited to have the opportunity to be a part of this conversation with you and Karen, and to think about how this all happened. I think I have to go all the way back to 2006 when my partner Sarah and co-founder of Twin Villages Food Bank Farm was in her grad school program, and Sarah comes from a multiple generation farm family out in the Midwest, and came out east and decided to keep that tradition moving in her family. And so I sort of got pulled into this food scene really quickly. And after her completing her graduate degree, I went back to school and put my attention and focus into social justice work with a focus on food access. At the time, I was really looking at communities of color and what was happening and what were the breakdowns in the system that were barriers for communities of color having equal access to food. And from there, it just sort of took root. In 2015, Sarah and I, after spending many years of trying to think about how we would bring these worlds together, met with Stephen Huffnagel at the time of the Damascata River Association, now Coastal Rivers Conservation Trust. And we shared our dream with him that we were really wanting to start a farm that was by and for the community, that we would grow all for donation to the Hunger Relief Network in Lincoln County. And actually, I have to thank Karen for that introduction, because I remember talking about the idea with her and she said, I think you should talk to Stephen. And we did. And Karen knew that Stephen was already hot in pursuit of finding farmers to come back onto the land and restore the Great Salt Bay Farm, which has been farmed for generations. And so we are the lucky people who landed there and had the opportunity to bring those fields back into production. And we're now in our 5th growing season. We started in our first year growing about 20,000 pounds of food. We now are producing 50,000 pounds of food that goes all direct to donation across Lincoln County food pantries and programs. So that's sort of one side of my world. And then the other part is that I was lucky enough a couple of years ago to join Good Shepherd Food Bank at a time when they were really looking to broaden their advocacy efforts. They had already sort of come around to the notion that we can't end hunger by distributing food alone, but we have to be involved in the policy work that is really addressing these issues at a root cause. And I was lucky enough to come on board to take that work to another level and to really build out their grassroots advocacy work. And so that's been my work for the past 2 years. And I just feel really lucky that both parts of my world get to come together and inform and support each other.
That's great. Yes. And Meg, I met you when you were at Kiev in the leadership program, right? And so you already had some of those connections right here in the community, which I imagine must have been really important in establishing a new farm and sort of building some of those relationships, like working with Karen, that it can't just happen in isolation, that it was really about that collaboration.
Yeah, it's so funny you should say that, because I was just thinking before I hopped on this call, like I remember going to that student diversity summit with you and riding the bus and getting to know you for the first time was so amazing. And at the time I was running that mentoring program across Lincoln County schools. So yeah, I mean, for me, everything starts with relationship, and especially in a small community, I feel like we're just so lucky to be so connected to each other and for there to be so much collective momentum around this topic of food security. And I really credit Karen for so much of the groundwork that was laid to allow so much of the work that's happening now take root, because she's been in this conversation and at the forefront far longer than many of us. And so our work is stronger because of her voice and her presence that really took root so many years ago.
So perfect segue into a nice introduction for Karen. So Karen, tell us a little bit about the history of farms and now Farms at the Y, and just sort of the dream or the vision that you've had along the way.
Well, let's see. Farm started in 2004, so a while ago. And basically, it was when my children were entering kindergarten where I made the connection between myself as a teacher teaching first graders and now having a kindergartner and wanting them to have better food. So I started working with a lot of people. And again, Meg, it's all about relationships. Because I remember when we had parents step forward and Amy Winston step forward and all these wonderful people. And then I went to talk to my daughter, who was the kindergartner, and I said, so how are we going to make this happen to get better food to children? And she said, go talk to the principal. And I thought that was so interesting to have a 5 or 6, she was 6, a 6-year-old also understand relationships on her level. So anyway, so we went to the farmers and the school administrators. And I remember the person running for office at the time in my community was Bill Earl, and he was knocking door to door. And I asked him, how can I make this happen? And he said, go to the superintendent. So we did, and we ended up trying to get more local foods into the school system. And I ended up in the kitchen volunteering alongside the food staff. And I remember, because I was a first grade teacher, I really thought I'd be volunteering more in the classroom than the kitchen, but it worked out that I was in the kitchen. So we started our first harvest lunch, and then the school was taking it on more. And we also started doing taste tests in the classroom. And then it occurred to me that we really needed to be teaching cooking classes, because we used to have home ec and now we don't. So Beth Mcpherson from Damascotta, she was the person that came forward and said, well, what if we build a kitchen above rising tide? And I thought, how are we going to fund that? So anyway, so she did the legwork of writing grants, and we have this beautiful kitchen because of all these people. Heather Bird, I can't even name the list of people that helped. Brady Hatch, it goes on. And so we built that kitchen, and for 3 years we brought classes up to the kitchen. And then we were having financial problems as far as continuing, so we reached out to different places, and the CLCY was one of those places. And Megan Hamlet said, let's work together, and we're creating the Y, and we can have a kitchen here as well. You could use both. And so 2 years ago, we moved into that kitchen, and we've been bringing more classrooms than ever before, and it's handicapped accessible, which is wonderful. And so we work with the classroom teachers and the principals, and we meet the curriculum. So, whatever some class is studying, then we will teach nutritionally dense foods along with what they're studying.
Yeah, I've had the pleasure of coming on field trips. My own children have participated, and it's a really incredible community organization that really reaches everyone, and lots of children and families. It's incredible. So I think it would be great to sort of start back a little bit around this idea of food insecurity and what it means to be living with food insecurity. And a lot of folks I talk to just in my work as a social worker, but also now campaigning, are aware that there are efforts, fill the bus at the Y. Now with the pandemic, there's a lot of talk around food. But I would say that frankly, a lot of folks are surprised that in Lincoln County, there are people who are living with hunger and a lack of access to adequate food and nutrition. So I don't know, Meg, if you want to start sort of this role of the Good Shepherd Food Bank and this idea that there are people hungry in our community, and without, I guess, could you sort of define how the food bank talks about food insecurity and what that looks like?
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with you wholeheartedly. Every time we have an opportunity at the farm to talk to a group, mouths just drop. And when they understand, or when they learn for the first time what hunger looks like in Maine. And I think so much of that is attributed to the invisibility of rural hunger, is that Maine is just full of long dirt roads. And we don't see the issue in front of us all the time. Schools, I think, like, you're in a great position, Lydia, because schools are one place where you can really get to know students and sometimes families, and it becomes more visible there. But for the broad portion of our community, it's just really easy to not see it, particularly if you don't have a reason to be looking for it. If you're not food insecure yourself, we're not always motivated to look and see the darker parts of our community. And so it's surprising to folks that food insecurity in our state is as significant of an issue as it is. We currently rank 16th in the country, and that is a great improvement over the past number of years. We took a real tumble downwards coming out of the 2008 recession and the mill closures that all happened at the same time. We were much further down on that list at the time. And only in the last couple of years have we begun to really pull back out of that. We saw our numbers rise high above the national averages after the recession. We got close to 15% of our population being food insecure. And the real struggle now is that we just began recovering. Our rates are, closer down to 12%. Maine is the hungriest state in all of the New England states. But as we look out, because of the impact of COVID-19, we're projecting right now and forecasting about a 40% increase in hunger across our state. And so if you do some quick math, that means that on the other side of this, 18% of our community across the state is going to be food insecure, and that's about 234,000 Mainers.
Wow, 1 out of 5, nearly.
Yeah, that's right. And when you look at, there's a real intimate connection between poverty and hunger. And 13% of our state lives in poverty, and 18% of our children live in poverty. Those to me are really unexcusable numbers, and it just demonstrates there's a lot of work to be done. So at the food bank, we obviously think about this issue statewide. I think the best way that we think about our work is we're like the huge grocery store to all of the food pantries, soup kitchens, and other programs across the state. So we have just over 400 partners that support the hunger relief work that is driven by Good Shepherd Food Bank. Our work is supply chain. It's about moving food, bringing food in and moving food out. It is about being involved at the policy level in our advocacy efforts. And we really prioritize nutrition in the work that we do at the food bank. And so in a normal operating year, that's really what the work looks like. Because of COVID-19, the food bank has really had to shift a lot of their priorities. And so right now we are all about food today, and have pivoted many of our systems to just focus on getting food out. Obviously there's lots of challenges and barriers to doing that, but that's really sort of the position that we're sitting in right now.
Okay. And so each food pantry or food bank is its own individual organization. So in Newcastle at the Second Congo Church, the Ecumenical Food Pantry, they operate independently, but use Good Shepherd Food Bank to access the majority of the food that they're able to then distribute. Is that correct?
Yeah, right. So we have partnerships with, like I said, about 400 different agencies across the state, and that provides them access to purchase food from Good Shepherd Food Bank. And also, we also have donated food that comes through that is free to all of our partners. And one thing I've mentioned that I think is really a significant change for the food bank in prioritizing nutrition is that fresh produce is always free to our partners. So that's really a hallmark of our commitment and dedication to making sure that folks get the healthy foods they need, because I think, and Karen, I'm sure will say this, that food is health. And so it feels really important to us that we're supporting people in ways that will also impact their health positively.
Yeah, I think this comes up with a lot of issues that we talk about in this series and beyond, that there's sort of that the value of fulfilling basic human needs is so high, but there's also an economic and like the reality of not meeting those needs at the beginning, that there's that repercussion of what happens when our core basic needs are not met. How is a society going to then handle what that looks like? And I think health and medical care is one of those examples of when you don't start with a strong foundation of high nutrition, it does take a toll on your well-being. People are I see a lot of this through schools, and some of the ways we see that are like free and reduced lunch, and that we have schools in our district who receive over 50% of their student body are receiving free and reduced breakfasts and lunches. And so that's 2 out of 3 meals a day that children are accessing at school. And I think that people's idea of living in poverty or living with food insecurity are sometimes stereotypes and images that we've seen portrayed in the media and the news. But the reality really comes down to, if wages are low and health insurance premiums are high, and transportation costs are greater, and the cost of fuel living in Maine, right? Like if all of these costs add up, it has to come from somewhere. And I see a lot of families really facing that difficult decision of, can I buy fresh produce, or can I buy food at all, or enough food to feed my entire family, or are one of our utilities being shut down, or do I need to pay for my car insurance so I can continue to get to work, or whatever it is. That it's not always like sort of storybook movie portrayal of poverty, but it is that when all of these things come together, food and nutrition is often one of the sacrifices that people make in order to meet some other basic need. And I see that a lot. Caring for Kids down in the Bristol Peninsula is an incredible organization. So they provide snack packs to children over the weekend, throughout the school year, and then also summer meals. There's so much incredible work. I know, we could list like the Gleaners and Twin Villages Food Bank Farm and all of these folks, Veggies to Table, doing really good work. And I think it illustrates the fact that this is very real. Like Twin Villages Food Bank Farm, am I right, Meg, that I read that you plan to grow 50,000 pounds of produce this year?
Yeah, that's our target goal. We hit it last year. And in addition to that, what we also realized, we renovated a storage hub space. Last year was the first time it was up and operating. So now we have the capacity to work with other growers and to continue building a relationship with Good Shepherd Food Bank, so that we can bring in additional food to aggregate through the hub. So we're hoping this year we'll hit about 15,000 pounds that we can distribute to the hub, in addition to the 50,000 pounds that will grow at the farm.
Yeah, so that's 65,000 pounds of produce that's going to feed folks in our community. I mean, if that supply is there, that is filling some demand for that. And it's really astonishing. So I think it's incredible that there is so much work being done. And I think that awareness seems like a big piece of that bringing folks in. And I know lots of people use volunteers, which I imagine will look different this year, but I know you and Sarah use a lot of volunteers on the farm, and the Gleaners rely on that. And there's a big community and an organization of volunteers in this community who really sustain some of the work of the organizations. And I imagine you're having to get creative with how to address some of those needs this growing season.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I'm happy to talk about that. And I also just want to thank and appreciate you for disrupting what I think is a really dangerous narrative of people living in poverty. Because of my work with Good Shepherd Food Bank, I work closely with a group of advocates up in the Rockland area through the Building Advocates program. And these are folks who are living food insecure here in the state, and are now trained as advocates to be part of this movement to end hunger here. And they're the hardest working people I know. They're piecing multiple jobs together. They're caring for children and grandchildren. And so we can't do enough to help break down the stories that we've created in our heads, because there's no truth there. So thank you for that. And yes, we have had to pivot quickly at the farm. we were so fortunate a couple years ago to receive a 3-year grant from the Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare Foundation to really initiate a volunteer program at the farm. And it's been an incredible force for us. We generally get about 1,500 hours of volunteer work at the farm, and that's from our adult volunteers, as well as we have a really amazing partnership with the Great Salt Bay School and Margaret Coleman, who is the ag coordinator there. We see every 5th to 8th grader out at the farm. And I sort of joke when they get there, but it's very true. They're there to work, and they know. We talk with them about food access and equity in the community. So it's a meaningful contribution. But we had a 7th grade group out one time, and in an hour, they had planted like 1,200 pepper plants. And so if you do the math real quickly,
it was amazing.
Yeah, so we have this great partnership where the Great Salt Bay students come out, Farms at the Y comes out, and they do cooking demonstrations in the fields while the kids are out there working. So it's just it's a great example of community collaboration when we're all out there together. But we have asked our volunteers to stay at home this year, and obviously we are not taking student volunteers because school is out of session. So we pivoted really quickly. I credit my partner in life and business, Sarah, to really making some quick, really smart decisions. We have never had any mechanization on the farm because we operate, it's called a no-till farm, where we really believe in building the soils and not disrupting the soil health. But we have had to look to bring in some equipment, and we're still not tilling the soil. So you'll see a tractor out there now, but it's for spreading compost, it's for spreading amendments. It will support us in our harvest time. And we have a few other pieces of equipment that are going to allow us to continue to be a consistent and reliable source of produce to our hunger relief partners this growing season, even without all of our wonderful volunteers.
That's great. That's excellent. And that ingenuity and creativity, I think, abounds in lots of local small businesses and organizations.
Yeah, we're seeing it all over.
So we got a question from Will Gale about state policy and how the state as an infrastructure can support through legislation and policy work addressing needs of hunger. That, we live in a community, and I say this all the time, that it's an incredible model of people coming together to support their neighbors and friends and families. But I sometimes struggle with that because I also have a problem with, so resource communities have volunteers and financial ability to do that. And what about communities in our state who don't have that, who don't have a Twin Villages Food Bank farm? And I think that it's great to see the awesome work that we do, but how can our state, and I put this out there, for either of you to speak up, but I really believe, as part of my role in being a leader for our community and representing us, that great, we should take this model and talk about some of these ways that should be universally understood as resources communities have the right to and should be able to access for all people.
Yeah. Karen, I feel like I'm chatting a lot. Do you want to?
No, that's okay. I think that we need to educate people about nutritionally dense foods and the health outcomes that happen when you're not eating nutritionally dense food. So, making sure that people are learning how to cook and garden and being empowered with that. And, we, as Meg said, it's hunger is invisible. And so if we really are educating kids preschool on up, or bringing parents in for cooking classes or gardening classes, or, handing out container gardens to our local kids. We were on a Zoom call this week where the principal was offering that the bus driver can deliver this to certain home or any home. So anyway, I'll let Meg jump in.
Yeah, well, I sort of want to talk a little bit more about the work that Farms is doing, because I see that education model, that we fund public education in the state, right? Who says that education should only be about core subjects that don't branch into some of those life skills and some of those basic skills that some of us may have learned in home economics or growing up in families that had the ability and time and resources to share some of those traditions. But I see a lot of the work that you're doing in our own school as helping give access to and some of those just some of that learning that happens that's not instructional in a workbook setting in a classroom,
Right.
but is really interactive and engaging. And I wonder about, I also know SNAP Ed is a program that comes into schools, and I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that's a federally funded program?
That's from Healthy Lincoln County. And so they're
Okay.
doing awesome work with the
Yeah.
SNAP Ed education.
Yeah, so there are some programs like that
Right.
across the state. And so I think it's great that that's happening, and that those continue to have a really big need in all communities, because I think that education, and I just want to point out that one of the things I love about farms is we're not targeting certain demographics and saying, oh, because of this label, because of this experience that you have in your home or your life or your socioeconomic status, you receive this instruction, that you're saying that we want all children to know and understand and taste nutritionally dense foods, and we're going to provide that to everyone. And I just like to also put a plug out there that, like, a field trip to Farm's Kitchen is the most affordable field trip we can take in this district. And I love that, we've done colonial cooking, we've done traditional holiday foods from different countries around the world. I mean, it is a really neat experience to be able to navigate sort of curricula and also healthy eating and cooking skills, because those certainly overlap and go hand in hand in addressing hunger needs in our community.
Right. And one thing I say to classrooms as they come through the kitchen is, or to the students, if you learn how to cook, you can take care of yourself for life. And once I say that, I add, and if you learn how to cook, you'll always have people around you, because people love people that know how to cook.
Yes.
So again, it goes back to the relationships of having people together, which I think is so important.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So, and again, it's, Farms at the Y, if not for the CLCY bringing us in, I don't think we would be reaching as many children, because we weren't only reaching the children through classes, but after school, the Thrive program. And then we were supplying an extra snack to those children. And, and my dream would be to have the children have some of the same recipes in their school kitchen or in their homes and things like that. So.
And I think I've heard, like, you have to try something, what is it? I think you say
that 17 times.
Yeah, like that it has to, right? You can't just expect someone to have a taste for every food that they're introduced to. And I think it's a great collaboration to think of school cafeterias and a program like Farms and Twin Villages Food Bank supplying new and unique foods that we may not have access to in other formats. I think that's
so. For a number of years, we've also Farms at the Y. We've been going to the food pantries, and we will bring a recipe and cook it there. And what's really nice about that is you have all the smells that come with onions or garlic, and people comment about that. And I find that when the kids come to the kitchen as well, they enjoy all the senses. So I'm always encouraging people to cook an onion or caramelize an onion and then bring the smells into your home, and it brings conversation and happiness among people.
That's great. I farmed for about 5 years out in Washington State right after I finished my undergrad degree, because I grew up in a family of social workers. And so I swore I would never become a social worker. So I studied geology and I went out west, and I really struggled with growing vegetables. We were an organic farm, and it felt like it was only accessible to certain folks. And, the cost of small scale farming, like, we were not making huge amounts of money. It was really hard work. But it felt very limited in scope. And I struggled with that because it felt like it was really an access issue, and that, you could only describe 16 different varieties of tomatoes if you came from a certain socioeconomic class. That, for folks who are shopping at the general grocery store and maybe didn't have, didn't know that there were all of these heirloom tomato varieties or whatnot. So I really appreciate that there's a lot of work in sort of evening that out, that nutrition should not be related to socioeconomics, that we should not we shouldn't be limited in our ability to enjoy a rich cultural tradition of cooking and eating together as families and neighbors, simply because of, a society that doesn't support living wages and Medicare for all, and, all of the other obstacles that sort of lead us down that path. So I appreciate the work that Farms is doing to equalize it, to make it accessible to everyone. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would chime in and just say too that that was a big part of the thinking behind the farm, was that as when we started convening some of the regional partners when we were getting ready to launch, we really wanted to explore what the question of hunger was in our community. And so we visited pantries and we talked with folks, and we saw, and you will see that a lot of the produce that shows up to pantries has sat on pallets for days at a time, and it was already near expiring. And so by the time you get it to the pantry, oftentimes its shelf life is so limited. And we really wanted folks to have the best quality of first-rate food, because it was about giving them nutrition, but also a sense of dignity and hope. And Lydia, I want to just go back quickly to Will's question about the policy piece, because I think Karen's point to education is a really important one. And I think we have to do the work of understanding what's going on in our communities so that we can work closely with our local representatives, because we live in communities where we can have those relationships with folks. And, I'm thinking of last year, the lunch shaming bill that was on the table, and, understanding that in schools, when kids come up against unpaid bills, that they were getting peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, which is just this clear divide. And then there's all this shame that gets held by students who don't have the money, who can't pay for their lunch. And I also want to say that at Good Shepherd Food Bank, we worked really hard last year to get renewed funding for the Mainers Feeding Mainers program. And if folks aren't aware of what that is, it's an incredible program that Good Shepherd Food Bank has been running for a number of years. We have contracts with about 70 farmers across the state, and it allows Maine farmers to grow direct for pantry. And so it's a total win-win program. We have it funded through next year, but we will have to go back and continue to seek funding for that program. So I think the question about policy, I agree with you. We can't leave this work up to our local communities. They're an important piece, but we also have to have an engaged, we have to have folks engaged at the legislative level. And so it's really understanding what's happening in your community, asking questions, finding out, and then being in conversation and supporting where you feel like you can support.
Those are great points. Thank you for bringing that up. And I know that Shelley Pingree also, as at the national level, has really pushed hard to advocate for local farms and food access. So I think that goes a long way. And I think it's excellent to see that at every level, that we're electing officials up and down the ballot who can prioritize some of these basic needs, because it really does. It's a vital need that we all have. And I think it brings, like, the work that you're both doing, it brings more voices to the table, right? And that's really it's so important to me that when we are making decisions, that whether it be about the food shaming bill or the people who will be most impacted often don't have representation and often don't have the means. And I feel that in the position I'm in, I have a school board that's incredibly supportive of my candidacy, and a school administrator. And it feels like there are not a lot of young working folks who have the ability to take time off to work in the legislature. And so I see it as an important sort of privilege that I have in the work that I'm doing, that I can continue to juggle both and support a family. So I'm excited for what's to come. I think that we are sort of getting close to wrapping up. I just wonder if either of you have any sort of actionable steps, ways for people to be involved right now. I know a lot of people, like you're saying, aren't volunteering as much, or there's not that ability to be up close and personal with fighting hunger, but I know that a lot of people still want to make a difference. And so I'm wondering if either of you have opportunities that you could talk about for folks to really give back as they're able to and support all of the ongoing work that's happening.
Sure. I can say at the state level, we've been able to forecast the need at Good Shepherd Food Bank over 6 months of COVID-19, and it's going to be a $6.3 million hit for us, and that's above and beyond our normal operating budget. And that's just for 6 months. And, you know, I mentioned earlier in the call that coming out of this, we're going to see a 40% increase in hunger across our state. And so the need is acute. It is now, but it is going to be very long lasting. So donating financially to Good Shepherd Food Bank is an immediate way you can hit this need. We just at the farm at Twin Villages Food Bank Farm just wrapped up a crowdsourcing online fundraiser. And, you know, thanks to the generosity of this community and our extended community, within 2 weeks, we exceeded our fundraising goal, which allowed us to make those different changes, those adaptations I talked about earlier, the mechanization. So we pivoted quickly, we raised the money quickly, and now we need to continue that fundraising support. So we have a link on our website to donate. But there are so many good people in this community who are a part of this effort. You know, I had made a list, but I think Lincoln County Food Initiative, all of the food pantries across the county, bringing donations to the food pantries. Purchasing product is really very tricky right now, and a lot of food pantries are not able to purchase food product in the quantities that they need, or they rely on retail donations from Hannaford's especially. But with the way that people are shopping right now, there are no donations. And so our food pantries are not getting that donated product. So those are a couple that come to the top of mind for me. Obviously, the incredible work that Karen's doing in the CLCY. The list is long. Veggies to Table that you mentioned earlier, Lydia. Karen, I don't know who you would add to that list.
Yeah, so I wanted to add, in conjunction with what you said, Lincoln County Food Initiative.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you want to donate to that, you go on to Lincoln County, Healthy Lincoln County. So Healthy Lincoln County and the Y. I know Main Street Grocery has been helping out, Rising Tide,
Mm-hmm.
I believe Hannaford. I mean, there's all this work going on together, the Fill the Bus program.
Yeah.
So the Lincoln County Food Initiative has been bringing meals to people that are in isolation. I know that food was cooked out of Kiev. We at CLC YMCA have started free soup Fridays, and today a corn and potato soup was made, and 29 quarts of soup went out to people. And I loved that we started with that recipe because that is a colonial recipe. So if it gets to a student that worked on that recipe once in the last couple of years, I'll be thrilled. But so there's a lot of work going on, and I think if people can help out financially, that would be great. I know it's a limited for volunteering, but as soon as that opens up, we have a garden at the Y, a raised bed. Margaret Coleman at GSB has raised beds. We're just all trying to work together to make sure our neighbors have food. So that's the other thing I was going to say is maybe check on your neighbors. Yes. To make sure that they have food. That's been important.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for mentioning that. And I think that Lincoln County Food Initiative is taking donations through newcastlefoodpantry.org, through the Ecumenical Food Pantry, and people can donate or call directly if they know of someone who's in need of a food delivery. They're delivering meals, so that continues to be an option. I had a Facebook member ask about, it was actually my mom, I think, Carrie Leah, talking about Meals on Wheels. And I know, you know, for the elder community and living in a community that demographically skews older, I think that Meals on Wheels has been pretty saturated with the need. And my understanding is the Lincoln County Food Initiative sort of came in when the traditional services that were available kind of were overfull, that there were more requests than they could support. Are either of you aware of the kind of role of Meals on Wheels? And Spectrum, I think, manages that?
Yeah. Well, one thing that I've learned now that I've gone to the Y to be using the kitchen, Dawn from Spectrum Generation is helping, and I don't know who else is helping her, but people are helping her get foods through Meals on Wheels. And I think there was a waiting list. So then Karen Ann Hagar was able to have people get food through the Lincoln County Food Initiative.
Okay.
So I think you're right that they were saturated with Meals on Wheels.
Okay. And that's just a great example of really that collaborative, those relationships that really matter in doing all of this work, that when you have those relationships and that network of support, it means that more people are taken care of and have their basic needs met. So it's incredible. Karen, I just
one last thing that
to plug, you mentioned the corn and potato soup, and I just wanted to plug the need to be eating Maine potatoes, that there's a surplus,
Yes.
and that everyone should be doing their part in purchasing and eating some good Maine potatoes, which our family are big fans of potatoes, so we're eating away in all the different forms. But yeah. Karen, go ahead. Did you have
I just wanted to also say to invite people to check on your neighbors for mental health, to make sure, because sometimes if you are struggling with mental health, you're not feeding yourself too. So, encouraging people to go for a walk with your physical distancing, but just looking out for all people.
Yeah, and I think your point is great, that sometimes providing food is an access point to also check on people's well-being. And I know the schools are doing that with food delivery. And hey, if someone didn't come outside and pick up the pot of food that you left for them yesterday, that might be a sign that we also need to check in a little bit more. So I think that's great that, our neighborly relationships and our roles look out for us in lots of different ways, including food and beyond. Yeah. Well, great. Well, I really appreciate both of you spending your Friday afternoon with us. I will put your information from your organizations down below in the comments if people want to know more. And thank you so much. Thanks for all of your support in joining us. And I hope that you have a lovely weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Great job.
All right, so I am just going to wrap up quickly. Thank you so much for joining us. I think this was a great conversation. There's a huge need in our state and including our community for providing nutritionally dense food, as you heard Karen say. And I think it's really important that we elect leaders who understand that there are people in our own neighborhoods, in our own communities, who do not have their basic needs met. Because when we are at the table making decisions about how we spend our money and how we talk about and plan for our future, which is going to be extremely important, I want to be a representative at the table in Augusta who speaks up when there are people and communities who are not there, whose voices aren't heard. So I appreciate you being here. It's an issue I care deeply about. As I said, and we talked about, this community has done an amazing job stepping up and supporting our neighbors, our friends, and our families. And I want to do that for you in Augusta. Please remember to vote. July 14th is our primary date. You can request an absentee ballot at maine.gov, search the Secretary of State's office, and please follow me on Facebook and join my mailing list at lydiacrafts.com. Thanks so much and have a great night. Bye.